Hello, you two. So, I usually read a story to you on a Thursday with reception and year one. So, I thought I would have a little read from our 10-minute fairy tales today. So, you've got a little story to listen to. So, our first story that we're going to read is Little Red Riding Hood. Once there was a girl called Little Red Riding Hood. She was called that because she always wore a pretty patterned cape with bright red hood. She just loved the way the cape swished and swayed as she skipped along. Okay. One day, Little Red Riding Hood's mother gave her a pot of honey. "Will you take this to Grandma?" she asked. Little Red Riding Hood was delighted. Grandma lived on the other side of the forest, so she could skip all the way there in her lovely red cape. Little Red Riding Hood waved to her father as she set off, but watching from the trees was a hungry wolf. The wolf was tired of eating bugs and berries. He wanted something bigger in his belly, something like Little Red Riding Hood. He could have just gobbled her up there and then, but wolves love sneaking around and making clever traps. Chortling and chuckling, the wolf laid a net on the forest path. Then he hid in the tree and waited for Little Red Riding Hood. The wolf watched as Little Red Riding Hood skipped closer and closer and skipped right over the net. "Why didn't it work?" growled the wolf. Carefully he prodded the net with his paw, and the net sprang up, trapping the wolf instead. Bother. By the time he had escaped from the net, the wolf was too tired and too hungry to make another trap. But he did have another plan. Grinning and giggling, he rushed to Grandma's house and knocked on the door. The door opened slowly and Grandma poked her head out. "Who's there?" she croaked. Quick as a flash, the wolf leapt from behind the door and gobbled poor Grandma up in one greedy gulp. He mumbled. That was a tasty starter. Now for the main course. The wolf pulled on Grandma's nightclothes and jumped into bed. His eyes twinkled and a grin spread across his face. As he heard the knock on the door, "Come in," he called out in a croaky, wavering voice. The door swung open and Little Red Riding Hood skipped into the cottage. "Hello, Grandma," she trilled. "I've brought you some honey." Little Red Riding Hood came closer and her smile fell into a frown. Grandma looked different. "Oh, Grandma," she said, "what big ears you have." "All the better to hear you with, my dear," replied the wolf. Little Red Riding Hood edged closer still. "Oh, Grandma, what big eyes you have." "All the better to see you with," muttered the wolf. "Oh, Grandma, what big hairy hands you have," exclaimed Little Red Riding Hood. "All the better to hug you with," replied the wolf. Little Red Riding Hood stepped back as the wolf's grin spread even wider. Grandma," she said, "what big teeth you have." "All the better to eat you with," snarled the wolf. And with that he sprang from the bed and swallowed Little Red Riding Hood up in one big bite. The wolf had never felt so pleased with himself. His plan had worked and his belly was totally full. He lay back on Grandma's bread and fell into a deep, happy sleep. Meanwhile, in the forest, Little Red Riding Hood's father had finished a hard morning's work chopping down trees. He decided to go to Grandma's house so that he could walk home with Little Red Riding Hood. There are wolves in these woods after all, he thought. Little Red Riding Hood's father was in for a shock. He reached the cottage, looked through the window, and there was the wolf, with an enormous belly, fast asleep on Grandma's bed. Little Red Riding Hood's father boiled with rage. "Has that greedy wolf eaten Grandma and Little Red Riding Hood?" he gasped. "The villain! But maybe I can still save them." So Little Red Riding Hood's father came up with a clever plan of his own. With one mighty swing, he smashed open the front door of Grandma's cottage. With a second mighty swing, he cut open the sleeping wolf's belly. Out tumbled Grandma and Little Red Riding Hood. Little Red Riding Hood jumped into her father's arms, although Grandma looked a little shaken from her time in the wolf's tummy. "Are you all right?" asked Little Red Riding Hood's father. "I think so," Grandma gulped. "What shall we do about the wolf?" asked Little Red Riding Hood. "If we let him go, he might gobble up someone else in the forest." Now it was Grandma's turn to come up with a brilliant plan. She told Little Red Riding Hood to run outside and bring her some rocks. So Little Red Riding Hood did, and rushed back in with a pile of speckled stones. Grandma asked her to tip them into the wolf's tummy, so she did that too. Finally, Grandma stitched off the wolf's tummy, and they all dashed outside to hide just as the wolf began to wake. The wolf yawned and stretched and then sat upon the bed. At first he didn't notice anything unusual, but when he tried to stand, something rattled in his belly. The stones. Now the wolf couldn't move without them rattling. The wolf howled so hard it made the whole cottage shake. The stones rattled louder and louder with each shaky step as he trudged back into the forest. "Now I won't be able to sneak around and set any more traps," he moaned. And the wolf never did. Instead, he went back to eating boring old bugs and berries. As for Little Red Riding Hood, she skipped all the way home in her pretty patterned cape. There we go, that's the end of that story. I hope you enjoyed it.